Do you have a passion for creating masterpieces? Or are you ready to start your career in fine art? Hi, my name is Kate, and I'm a professional, award-winning artist, teacher, and photographer. And I'm here to let you in on the secrets of turning your art into a career. I will show you how to turn a few shapes into a masterpiece in 3 easy stages. If you can hold a pencil and you have the guts to pursue art, then you have the potential of becoming something great. Now, enough with the intro. Let's get sketching. Supplies you will need include a sketchbook, drawing pencils, an eraser, and a sharpener. These are your core supplies, and you will need them in every stage. All right, let's get creating. Drawing cold is the first mistake amateur artists make. Every professional athlete warms up before a big race, and you should too. Warming up gets all that shaky sketching out, gets you focused and ready to tackle your project. So let's begin with a challenge to get your hands and mind ready for this lesson. Here is a random shape. Copy it down onto your paper. Now, I want you to take this shape and create a character from it. You cannot erase the shape, but you can add to it. If you feel confident in your skills to proceed, do so. You will have 3 minutes to complete your character. If you need further instructions to help you proceed, listen up. Character design is a challenge. It's testing your creativity. It comes naturally to some, and others it's a hurdle to overcome. If you have no idea how to begin, here's some structure. Make your character have clothing of some kind, or make this into an animal or fantasy creature. Go with the first thing that pops into your mind, and don't feel rushed. Pause this video if you need time to work on your character. And that's time. Make sure to snap a picture and share this in the discussion section so that your art can inspire others. Now that you're warmed up, let's begin. Sketching is the most important part of a masterpiece. Everyone can put pencil to paper, but not everyone can sketch properly. Let's make sure that you have a leg up on your competition. Most artists quit at the sketching phase because they aren't using the right movement in their arms. Take a look at this. Try drawing a circle only using your fingers. It's gonna turn out looking a little something like this. Definitely not what you were going for. Okay, now I want you to try drawing a circle only using your wrist. Definitely not what we were going for. More circular, but really, really shaky. All right, let's keep moving up our arm. Next is your elbow. More circular, but really hard to control the pencil. All right, so we know the fingers don't work, and we know the wrist doesn't work, and we know the elbow doesn't work, which leaves you with one joint on your arm, your shoulder. So go ahead and use your shoulder joint to draw a circle. just like that. Whenever you see people draw perfect circles, they're using their shoulder to draw it. They're also using their entire arm to draw it. This is called full range of motion. Your arm should always be moving whenever you're sketching to get the best sketches. All right, tip number 2. Drawing straight lines are extremely tricky for some people to do. Here's how to master them. First off, you need to take a ruler and draw a few examples on your paper. This ruler is called an architect's ruler or a T-square. Very, very handy if you struggle drawing straight lines. I'm going to draw 2 straight lines on my paper like this. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to trace each of them 5 times. Watch how my arm moves. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Do you see how I try to stay as much on the guide as possible? All right, now repeat it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, now you're going to draw a straight line right next to it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is called muscle memory. All right, it's very handy to use, and these guides are really, really helpful. Now, every time you want to draw another straight line, go back to your guide and do your steps. 4, 5, and then redraw the line again. This is going to train your brain the movement of sketching straight lines, just like you were learning to ride a bike. Now, let's change it up a bit. Let's say your lines are angled or diagonal. Go ahead and draw them out. I'm not going to use my ruler because I find it easier to draw diagonal lines just with my pencil. So I have 3 diagonal lines like so. What I'm going to do is I'm going to trace each one 5 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now attempt. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You should have 5 parallel diagonal lines on your paper. Once you've mastered those, you can move on to tip number 3. And remember, tracing isn't a bad thing. It's when you claim that you did it all on your own or plagiarize someone else's work, that's when it becomes wrong. But tracing is an excellent tool to learn how to draw accurately and quickly. So don't be afraid to use it. Now for tip number 3. We're going to work with a value bar. A value bar refers to the elements of shadows, highlights, and midtones. Many sketches will include value so the artist can tell where they want the shading to live. Value bars are a perfect way to understand value change. Remember, shadows gradient into midtones and then into highlights. It's a gradual change, not a segmented theory. So let's create a value bar. A value bar begins very hard in the shadows areas. So you're going to take your pencil and you're going to press kind of hard like this. Try to keep all your strokes even, that way your drawing doesn't turn into like a tornado looking thing. Now, it may be hard to tell because of how my lights are, but what's going to happen is that I'm going to start lightening up my grip as I go along the paper. So I draw lighter and lighter and lighter until I'm barely touching the paper with my pencil and it completely fades off into white. This is called a value bar. Now, you can leave it like this and it will still be accurate, but it doesn't look very good. So what you're going to do is use a process called layering. Layering is whenever you stack graphite on top of each other. So I'm going to start off hard again and repeat. Slowly fading it off. Over and over and over again. Now, graphite can be a bit tricky because graphite is very naturally shiny. So you don't want to press super hard with it, otherwise you're going to get that graphite shine. So you just take your time and patience and slowly build up those layers until you have a nice solid gradient called a value bar. Now, this can easily be turned into color as well, but learning it with black and white is easiest at first. And there you go. All right, now that you understand the basics of sketching, let's get drawing. Let's talk about construction. This is the first phase of drawing. Construction is understanding the build of whatever you want to draw. Here, I have a reference. If you are a beginner artist or a seasoned sketcher, I do recommend working with a reference, especially if you are struggling to visualize an image in your head. First, I will simplify the reference. Simplifying means to break down into simpler forms. Once the reference is simplified, I can begin construction. Getting this right is crucial since everything is built on top of it. Copy down every single step that I draw on my paper. First, always starting with the head. Make sure the head is living in the upper left quadrant of your paper. This will leave room for the ears, the muzzle, and the rest of the body. The head is then connected to the action line. The action line tells you what your subject is doing, and your action line will look like this. In this case, your fox will be sitting, so the action line will angle as so. Next, you need to get in your last two major structures. This is your rib cage and your hips, and they are located here and here. Now, you won't know the exact locations until we actually sketch in the rest of the character. I can already tell that my oval is actually a little too far to the right, so I'm going to go ahead and move it over just slightly. Kind of like so. Now, everything that builds off this major structure needs an action line as well. That includes legs, both the fronts and the backs, and the tail. So I'm going to draw those in next. One leg will live right here. And I'll block out where the foot's going to go. Now, if you look, it can already look like my arm is a little too short. So I'm going to elongate it just a little bit, which is going to change the location of my hips. Rule of thumb to work by in art is that whenever you change one thing, something else is probably going to change as well. So I changed the length of the leg, which means that my hips are going to move down. One thing affects another thing. Now, as you can see, I struggle with the location of hips, and that's perfectly fine. This is the construction phase, so it's okay to mess up and it's okay to test things. This is the time to do so. And you can see that since I changed the hips, it changed the action line. So I've changed the action line as well. Now I have a more accurate looking construction. Now I'm going to get in the back legs. Since the hind legs are sitting down, which it's kind of like it's compressed, the action line is going to be very, very short, like so. I'm going to make sure that it does not touch its front paw though. Then I'm going to draw on the tail. The fox's tail is big and fluffy, so I'm going to give it a big and kind of lengthy line to represent the tail. In this phase, I also like to block in the major structures of the head. This includes any huge structures like the muzzle or the ears. You simplify everything down. When you look at the ears, you need to figure out what shape you need to use, which in this case would be triangles. One on this side, one on this side. I might make this one just a little bit bigger. Do you see how I'm using straight lines to block everything out? We'll talk about that in the next lesson. And then the muzzle. Tilt it just slightly down. As so. This is what your first phase should look like. When you have this completed, you may move on. Before you move on, make sure to check your sketch. This method is called flicking. What you're going to do is hold your paper up to your screen, so that way it's sitting right next to my drawing. Now, you're going to look at my drawing, then look at yours. Then look at my drawing, then look at yours. And flick back and forth. This method is called flicking. Whenever you see something move on your drawing, you know it's incorrect, and you need to apply your corrections. Please make sure that you do this before you move on, because if something is wrong in this phase, it's going to be obvious in the very end. Now that you've checked a drawing and that you know that everything is correct, go ahead and take your eraser and lightly erase your entire sketch. We don't need this sketch, it's just there to kind of help us build our character, or animal, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to leave mine light enough that way you can still see it, and I'm going to begin my second phase. Now this phase is called structure. Structure and proportions are really, really important to a drawing. Structure tells you kind of where everything is located, while proportions tells you how big some things are versus how small things are in their relation to one another. Now we always start with the head because the head determines the rest of the proportions of the body. And I usually start with the ears because that's the biggest kind of like form on the main structure of the head. So I'm going to start with the ears. Now watch, you're going to see all my lines are very, very straight. Now I do this for a reason. Your brain loves to see curves. It finds curves very satisfying to look at, and so it's more likely to overlook mistakes whenever you use curves to draw. But when you use lines, your brain is more likely to catch those mistakes, and it's being more picky. So you want to draw with lines first, and then you're going to curve them out later. I angle my head, following the circle, and I just build everything out into lines. This is also where you can fix the anatomy of your animal. So So if the muzzle was too long, you can shorten it. I might fix that muzzle in the next phase. I haven't decided if I want to keep it yet or not. You're going to see that I'm going to make lots of mistakes on the way because I'm testing to see where I like things to go. You'll also notice that all of my lines don't attach to one another. I did this on purpose to kind of just give me the freedom and like malleability to change things instantly. And at any point, if I'm moving too quickly, just pause the video and catch up. Now I do curve it a little bit on this side just because it just helps me kind of remember that, hey, there's a big fur kind of change right over here. Now that's the main structure of the head itself. Then I'm going to start structuring the body. Starting with the shoulder. That's the next major structure. And I'll break this leg down into kind of easier forms for you to be able to see. Like a triangle. Do you see how there's a triangle living right here? May need to come down just a little lower. I have an ankle, which is represented kind of like by a rectangular shape. Then the toe pad, or the base of the foot, is represented by a triangle. Do you see how it shrinks down? All right, you need to be able to recognize these proportions. It's bigger up here, and it shrinks down to smaller, then it kind of widens back out. That's proportions. Now I'm gonna draw on a chest line, kind of right here, and if I look, after adding that shoulder in, this is a little lower than I would want it, so I'm gonna raise it up. Bring this like so. The anatomy doesn't look quite right, so I'm gonna just go ahead, there we go, correct that. Now, since foxes are symmetrical on both sides, which means the same on both sides, you can just recopy down the structures over to here. Just make sure that one foot is shorter than the other. This is called perspective. I'm gonna work on the back now. Now, since he's sitting down, gravity is pulling it down towards his hindquarters, so make sure there's a lot of mass kind of down in there. Just like bends around that circle I drew. Don't round out that hindquarter leg perfectly. They don't turn into perfect circles. There's a little bit of corner action going on there. If you look, that foot kind of bends into a triangular shape. Chest line. Back leg. Now he feels a little bit crowded, so I might give him a little more mass on his hindquarters. And then I'll block out the tail. And I want to remember to actually block in the eye as well. Kind of that eye location. Kind of in there. Now I can already tell that my forehead's a little bit off, so I'm going to correct anything right now. Because basically what's going to happen in the next phase is I'm just going to draw like right on top of this. So I want to make sure that everything is correct before I move on. Now, there's my completed sketch. So you're going to repeat what you did earlier. You're going to use the flicking method. Once your drawing is complete, hold it up to the screen and flick back and forth, just like you did before, and see if you can catch any mistakes. All right, go ahead and complete your flicking method, and then you can move on. Now to move on to detailing and structure. Finally, we can move on to the fun part. One more time, go ahead and lightly erase your sketch. So I did catch a few mistakes when I was looking over my sketch that I'm going to fix now. Now, it's really important to keep your pencil really nice and sharp in this phase, mostly because dull pencils create mistakes. All right, so now we're going to move into drawing the fox itself, starting with the ears, of course. I'm going to build out some furring lines, and you'll watch that I actually follow those lines that I just created, but I give them just a little bit of bend to them. Same thing on the muzzle. I'm just bending the structure out. You're going to see that I haven't added in any fur lines really, noses, or eyes yet. Because what I'm doing is I'm blocking out the structure first. Because if this structure is incorrect, anything I pile on top of it is going to be wrong as well. So I noticed the muzzle was too high, so I'm going to bring it up just a little bit. As so. Now I can start actually detailing in the fox itself right now. I'll teach you how to draw these furring lines in a later lesson. So just go ahead and start following along with my sketch. And filling in your details. As so. Now that eye is really throwing me for a loop there. But you want to think of it like a triangle shape, not as an oval. This is another common mistake that you see with amateur artists. Is not understanding how the anatomy of the eye works. So when you look at an eye from the front view, you're going to see it as an oval. But you'll see in the two corners, they kind of turn into more triangular shapes. So when you see it from the side, you actually see more of this triangular shape rather than the circle. So you need to be able to mimic that in your artwork as well to create a convincing eye. As so. Now you don't want to give fur to every single line. I can see that my neck is a little too long over here. I'll come back and work on that here in just a minute. This means I need to raise that shoulder up a bit. Now I don't use fur on every single line because we can see this is a fox. And we already know that foxes are furry, so we already have that basic knowledge. So we don't need to give every line of fur texture, just the areas where a lot of fur is going to be happening, like in the joints or like any major changes like along the chest line or fur texture changes. Lastly is the tail. Make sure you add furring lines to any major corner change. Mostly because that tail is strictly just a muscle and fur. As so. Don't forget to add in those little fur changes. When I refer to fur changes, it's referring to like the color change of the fur itself. The fox is red, white, and brown. So I want to make sure that I make those places kind of obvious in there. Now, personally, I don't add mouths to my sketched characters. That's up to you. If you want to add a mouth in, go for it. Now, this is as far as I'm going to go with this sketch itself. Once you have all this in, go ahead and move on to the next video where we'll talk about how to make your sketch come off the paper and pop up and look really neat. Now, sketches on their own can look cool if left like this, but sometimes we want to make things pop and make them look neat. So let's go ahead and do that. Don't worry, there is no more erasing after this. What you're going to do is you're going to start shading things in. Remember how I talked about the different values of the fur? We're going to work with that now. So there's a little bit of a dark value living kind of up in the ears. So I'm going to shade those in using the same techniques that we learned in the beginning with the value bar. Making sure to fade it off on the edges. Same thing over here. Maybe a little bit in the ears. Shading that nose just a little bit. Use a couple of hatching marks. Hatching is referring to the kind of just like different little lines to create an overall texture like this. Number one rule of shadows and shading is that all shadows connect. This gives it a more realistic feel to it. So I try to attempt to make most of my shaded areas kind of connect. This isn't a super realistic fox after all, so I don't have to be super meticulous about that. Maybe there's a little shading over here. Along the backside. You might want to decide where you want your light source to come from. Most of my light source is coming from the upper kind of like left area. So I'm making sure that I have most of the shadows living on the right side. Remember, the shadows always live on the opposite side of the light source. So if it's coming from the left, they're going to live on the right. Also, anything that layers gets a shadow as well. So any fur that's kind of overlapping one another, like in this area, will get shaded. I'll also shade any major fur change colors, which is kind of like in the paw area. And I already shaded in the ear area, which is where the other major one is. This back foot also gets shaded because it's kind of hidden underneath the main body structure. As you watch me shade, you'll notice that all of my strokes always go the same direction. And that I use a very light hand and a very angled hand whenever shading. Now, I'm using a 2B pencil in order to shade this all in. I highly recommend that you get a drawing pencil set instead of drawing with a mechanical pencil or with a normal yellow pencil. Drawing pencils come with a variety of weights and styles, so it's really handy, especially if you kind of struggle with drawing too hard or drawing too dark. It's very, very handy to have. Like so. Can't forget the tail area. Don't get sloppy. I know it's very easy to get sloppy in that very end area because you want to be just done with the sketch itself. But you can't let yourself get sloppy. You have to give your whole heart into it the entire time. Kind of like so. Now, another tip that you can use in order to make a sketch pop is using stronger weighted lines, which means heavier weighted lines, also known as darker lines, okay? All right, so what you're going to do is you're going to figure out where your shadows are living. Mine are on the right side, so most of my dark lines are going to be on the right side. And what I'm going to do is not press super duper hard, but just a little bit harder than I did with the normal sketch and kind of make some of these things pop out, make these lines stronger. Now, remember, these lines are going to draw attention because they're darker than all the other lines. So if you don't like an area, don't darken the lines up because there's automatically going to be attention drawn to it because it's darker. So I recommend using these dark lines in areas that you're very proud of. That way the attention is drawn more to there rather than the areas that have mistakes in them. You also use these lines if something got like kind of blended too much, like in my paw area, you really can't see the toes anymore. So I kind of darken them up just a little bit. Or if like the lines kind of aren't clear and you really can't tell what you're looking at. Kind of like down in here. It's kind of like a last ditch effort to really make your sketch pop off the page and make it look like you know what you're doing. And you'll see that my kind of style towards the tail kind of changes a little bit. It's more sharp up here and a little bit more messy down here. It's because I want most of the focus to be over in this area. So I let mostly sharp lines live over here rather than down in the areas where I don't want more attention dragged to it. Add a little shadow on the bottom just to give it a sense of depth. And I always make my shadow just a little bit wider than the subject is. And there you go. There is a very simple way to make an effective sketch. Go ahead and finish up your sketches and feel free to snap a picture and share it down below. Sketching is crucial to mastering the foundations of art. Through this course, you have learned how to master sketching from the basic building blocks all the way up to the complicated final texture details of a sketch. If you want to spice things up more, you can use colored pencils, pens, or even toned paper to really make your sketches pop out. Remember, you don't have to show people your sketchbook, so get messy and creative. Sketchbooks are meant to get ruined, scribbled, and creative in, so don't limit yourself to perfection. Remember to post your final sketch in the discussion area down below. That way, you can see how other people's turned out as well. Remember, no two artists are the same, so never compare yourself to others. Now get out there and be creative.